Hello, everybody. Holly here with Reality Sandwich. Today I am joined by my friend Linden. We're going to be chatting a little bit about psychedelics, harm reduction, and how Linden has carved a really unique space for herself in the psychedelic industry. Thanks for being here, Linden.
Holly, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to talk with you today.
Yeah, me too, me too. Take a few minutes to introduce yourself. Where do you live? What do you do?
My name is Linden Schaffer, and I am coming to you today from Tongva Land, which is in Southern California. I work in the psychedelic ecosystem in a few different ways. I would say mostly I consider myself a community architect and community builder. I run two women's communities, one in person called the Los Angeles Women's Psychedelic Community, and an online global women's community called Reveal. I'm also on the team at the Global Psychedelic Society, which is a national nonprofit organization that gives education, resources, and support to other psychedelic leaders across the world. So I have my hands in a bit of everything. I also consult in the space. I am I think Reveal is my third business. So I guess you could call me a serial entrepreneur at this point in my life. And so having run and grown businesses, specifically in the health and wellness space, I do some consulting and strategic advising in the space as well.
Wow. Okay. Very cool. Very cool. I definitely want to hear more about your businesses, but I want to take it like way back to the beginning and how you even became aware of psychedelics, took interest in psychedelics, first tried psychedelics. Like, how did you become aware of this universe?
Sure. Well, without throwing anyone under the bus, right, at this point. I was a teenager when I discovered psychedelics. Probably to date, like most people, cannabis was my entry point. Not even realizing as a teenager that, this technically was in the world of the psychedelic ecosystem. And as I got older, I went to college in New York City, had this amazing sort of playground at my feet. And I was never a big drinker. I'm allergic to some alcohol. My hangovers were just not worth it. And I learned that very early on. And so I was introduced to other psychedelics. At the time, MDMA was making its way through the clubs. And so I was fortunate enough to be introduced to that substance and be safe with that substance, which isn't always the case. And part of the reason that I've gotten into the space of community building around harm reduction, I consider myself very privileged and very fortunate to have had the experiences that I've had. And so that was kind of like the very early introduction, using these substances very recreationally. And as my interest in these substances and as in the psychedelic space became more above ground, if you will, I moved into intentional work with these substances. So that's the beauty, I think, of psychedelics is up until now, I think many people were introduced to these substances in a recreational way, which can be very beautiful, especially if you are using the set and setting in the right way. You're testing your substances, right? You can have such beautiful, life changing experiences in a recreational container. And then for me, as I got older, as I started finding the intentional ways to use these substances, I now, use them in different substances in different ways for different things, which I'm sure we're going to talk about.
Absolutely. Okay. So, and I think that's a common story, right? Most of us, generally, a lot of people have a recreational introduction to many substances, and then as we get older, wiser, it's like, oh, maybe there's something more to this than dancing all night long until the sun comes up somewhere, which is also medicine in its own right. Definitely not hating on that. So what was a turning point for you, between maybe that recreational versus therapeutic understanding? Was there an experience you had that, a different type of internal work happened, or just something about the experience in general?
Yeah, I would say there were, for me, there were two very distinct turning points. The first was, I would say, maybe 15 plus years ago. I mentioned I had been using MDMA in a recreational source. And at that point, I had met my husband and had introduced him to the substance as well. And we found out, again, because I wasn't reading any research or anything at the time, that it was a great substance that could improve our relationship and make us closer, make communication easier in certain circumstances. And so we sort of transitioned to using it in the club to once a year using it at home for the purpose of reconnection and improving our relationship. So I think that was a huge turning point for me with that particular substance. And it's something that has been present in my life for over a decade. And then I think the second turning point, and it's the turning point that actually uh, propelled me to work in this ecosystem as well, was the pandemic. I'm sure many people have these stories, right, of either getting reintroduced during the pandemic. For me, I mentioned I was a serial entrepreneur. I had businesses that were shut down during the pandemic. One of the businesses that I had was an international wellness hospitality company where I took people around the world to meet indigenous cultures, learn from them, have this cultural and community exchange, and really dive deep into some of the practices in the West that we've co-opted in some ways and whitewashed and tried to get back to the initial source. And so I have a lot of experience in terms of harm reduction, in terms of creating safe containers, in terms of looking at reciprocity and what it means to share collective wisdom, to take from indigenous cultures in a respectful way. What I started seeing during the pandemic is all of a sudden we very publicly are talking about this mental health crisis. Whatever people are doing is not working. All of a sudden, people are turning to psychedelics, specifically ketamine, because it was the one thing that people could prescribe because of some of the changes in the laws. At the time, you could mail ketamine. So, like a lot of things, bubbled the psychedelic work to the surface. And I started in my circle, because I was in the field of health and wellness, started specifically hearing from women about their experiences and being horrified that they were either going to ketamine clinics or using microdosing, using psilocybin, whatever the substance was, and they were working with people who had never done these substances themselves. They were being left alone to have their experience. There was zero preparation or integration. Like all of these things, I started to see red flag, red flag, red flag. And I said to myself, oh my, this is not good. And because of my past experience of everything I mentioned in helping to create these safe containers, I said to myself, there's a real way I can help here. I can start to build community. I can start to help educate people, point them towards resources, work with them on preparation and integration, and make sure that whatever experience they have, recreational, therapeutic, it's up to everybody to choose their own path. But for me, I feel my place right now and my mission is to make sure that everyone has the tools to empower that transformation safely.
Mm. Yeah, that just is terrifying to think of being left alone in a psychedelic situation under somebody's guidance that has never sat with this medicine before. I heard that something similar when I was speaking with another gentleman about this, and he has been serving ayahuasca for 30 plus years. And he had said he was chatting with a new psilocybin facilitator who sought him out. Hey, I'm looking for some advice. And it was the same story. This person had never sat with the medicine themselves. And they're like, I was trip sitting for this woman the other day and she just wouldn't stop crying. I just didn't know how to make her stop crying. It's like, let her cry. But it just, my heart breaks for anybody that finds themselves in a situation where they have the courage to sit with plant medicines and then are unable to have a positive experience, not because of what they're going through, but because the setting and the preparation and integration were not well outlined. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with vetting your psychedelic therapist, practitioner, or otherwise, which is an intimidating subject for someone that may be coming in from the outside. So how does someone begin? How do you begin the research or start to vet somebody that you're going to trust to deliver you this medicine and hold this space for you?
I think it's a really good question, and I'm going to answer it. But first, I want to step back even further, because one of the guides that I sit with and I work with said to me a while ago, your integration experience begins the moment you decide you want to sit with medicine. Period. And so there's a long journey that somebody has to take before they can even get to the step of the guide, right? And so the way that I like to talk about harm reduction and the way that I frame it in everything I do is I have this framework called the 5 S's of psychedelics, which is screening, set, setting, support, and sustainability. Mm. And you can add so much to this. Each category has so much within it that we can talk about. And going back initially to sort of that screening process, I think the screening process is for many things. Yes, it involves screening who you're going to work with. It involves screening your substances, right? So many times you have to get your substances yourself. They're not necessarily provided. So we should be testing our substances. And screening also, in my opinion, is something inward that you need to do, right? You need to check in with yourself and ask yourself these questions like, why am I drawn to this? Is it trendy and I'm hearing about it? Or is it something that I want to do? Mm-hmm. Am I trying to solve something, right? Do you have some kind of medical diagnosis and nothing else has worked? Or you're trying to get off medication and you've heard that these are, there are some alternatives out there. Are you doing this for conscious expansion and spiritual connection, right? There's all these things, I think, before we even decide to get to the guide stage that we need to think about. And this for me was where I saw a lot of the harm happening, is that people were just like rushing forward with the first medicine, with the first resource that they had, because they didn't even know that they maybe should take a beat and ask themselves some of these questions and then try to resource, what they're looking for. If you're looking to cure a medical diagnosis, for example, there are psychedelic assisted therapists out there that specialize in certain diagnoses. There are psychedelic assisted therapists out there that work with certain medicines, right? That's the other thing. You don't want to go to a guide who's like, I work with 100 different substances. No, that doesn't mean that means they're an expert in nothing, right? So there are so many things before you even get to that stage that you need to do sort of an internal inventory. If you're not sure what questions to ask, right? This is why I started creating my communities, so that people can come into these communities, women specifically, before they even take that first step. Because if you're unsure, right, if you're heading down this path and you're unsure, how do you even know you're headed down the right path? Like, let's take a step back and ask other women who've done this before, what their experience is. There's tons of information on the internet as well. I mean, you can just Google every kind of psychedelic substance you've ever heard of, and you can probably find where it originated, what some of the side effects are, what is the setting that they're typically served in, all of those kinds of things. So I think in terms of screening, that's kind of where you want to start. The other thing that I think is so important, which I don't think we talk about enough, and you mentioned the majority of the challenging psychedelic experiences, quote unquote, the harm that I've seen caused, has nothing to do with the substance, right? It does have to do with the set and the setting, right? So who's around you, who's guiding you, what is their experience, how are they supporting you, what resources are they giving you? And so that's the other thing when it comes to screening. You don't know what you don't know. And so in the communities that I run, we have like lists of questions like, by the way, here's like the top few things you need to be asking, right? Whoever's guiding you, whether it is from an indigenous lineage, whether it is someone who is Western, who has been sitting with the medicine for a long time, whether it's a psychedelic assisted therapist, right? There's all these different ways that you can find people to sit with you. You mentioned a trip sitter, all this stuff. Like, how long have these people been working with this medicine is probably the first question you need to ask. And how often are they sitting with it themselves? Because if the answer is they've never served it before, they've never sat with it before, like, run, right?
Bye.
So, that's the first thing. The second thing is, you as an individual need to ask yourself, if you're going in to heal something, and I'm using heal in quotes, depression, anxiety, PTSD, right? Some of these more medical diagnoses. Some people go into this process looking literally for a magic pill or a magic solution. And they think, hey, I have this crippling issue. The medicine is going to make it all better. The medicine shows you how to make it all better. The medicine doesn't make it all better. So I think it's very important to be very aware that there's a lot of work that goes into this process before and after. You have to be willing to do that work before and after. And you have to ask yourself, am I willing for however I'm feeling right now to get worse before it gets better? Because that can also happen a lot, and we don't talk about that.
Yeah, that's true. That's an important part. It's like, use the term healing crisis when you're talking about like detoxing, bodily diets and things. But I think that we can go through a spiritual and mental and emotional healing crisis with psychedelics too. The integration part certainly, I feel like, gets left out in so many spaces. Maybe you get a phone call or a group chat or something after you sit in a group type container, but what happens 6 months down the road when you remember something you experienced and now it's right here on your shoulder all day, every day. And you're like, what do I do with this? Why is this here now? What does it mean? How do I take actionable steps? And I think that's a question that I know I've had, and I know others that I've spoken with have had, is, okay, what does integration actually look like practically? Like, what am I actually supposed to do with the thought, the feeling, or the block, or the thing that comes up? Is that something that you talk about in your group, or that women share about in your group? Is, here's what I did, and what does if you're comfortable sharing, what are some of those things?
Yeah. And again, I think like integration is amazing and it's a must do, but you just can't, integration doesn't happen without preparation, in my opinion. And so we focus a lot on preparation as well. I do co-lead a cohort called Embodied Integration, because I think there's a lot of things that happen or could happen, right, when you're going into some kind of psychedelic experience. And if you're not prepared, it's very hard to integrate on the back end, right? And so one thing that we talk about a lot is having a curious mind, right? And that can be, you can develop or work on, quote unquote, a curious mind through meditation, for example, right? It's allowing thoughts to come up and not trying to like judge them or force them in a certain way. But it's about saying, like, what are you here to tell me? What are you here to show me, right? If there's this line that we talk about all the time in this space, like, in your journey, if you're shown a door, go through it, right? And so there's a lot of work before you even get to the integration piece that you need to have happen in preparation in order for you to have an experience to integrate, right? Because there's so many people that I meet that are like, I didn't feel anything, or I never, people said you see XYZ and that never happened to me, or people said you talked to past loved ones that never happened to me. A lot of that, in my opinion, comes from the preparation stage. How in touch with you are in a spiritual way? How in touch with you are you in your body? How comfortable are you sitting with uncomfortable feelings, right? Like, a lot of this stuff needs to be practiced before, so that in your experience, you can have an experience to integrate. And so the other thing that I think can get lost, not always, and which is why we created the Embodied Integration cohort and Reveal, is integration isn't always from the top down, meaning through your mind, right? And sometimes it's through your body and then into your mind. And so I think there's also work that needs to happen to get in touch with your body, right? And sometimes you'll have an experience. For me, my 5-MeO DMT experiences were completely physical, they were not mental. And so, for me, in order to even understand that and then to begin to integrate those experiences, I had to have the prep. I had to be able to let go of any perceived way I thought a journey would go. And then afterwards, when I felt energy rising and I didn't know what to do with it, I danced it out.
Mm.
And had I not known that that was an integration tool, maybe I wouldn't have done it. Maybe I would have panicked, who knows? But having all of these, whether it's yoga, meditation, journaling, talking to somebody, dancing, doing body work, doing art, right? There's so many different ways, breath work, tapping. I could go on and on, right? Of this huge toolbox that I've developed over the last 20 plus years working in the wellness industry that has allowed my integration to be smoother.
Mm. Which really just makes so much sense when you consider that psychedelics can be a part of a wellness routine, right? When we talk about wellness, that's so holistic. Like we are talking about mind, body, spirit, and we are talking about how it's also individualized. Your wellness isn't the same as my wellness. And, you know, I think that's an important piece that gets overlooked too is, yeah, what's your relationship like with your body before you get into this? Yeah, I've definitely had some experiences where it's like, oh my gosh, this is so physical. I have to walk around. When normally it's like maybe you shouldn't be, not shouldn't, but everybody else is lying down with an eye mask on. I want to move, and they're I need to be free to do that. So I think that's an important part for people to consider too when they're looking into where they're going, whether it's like a retreat center or if this is in a private home or what the environment is like. Are you free to move? Is it considered safe for you to move about and wander where you are on your own? Is there somebody there that can support you in the event that you do decide to go take a little jaunt or leave the area? I think that's a super critical piece to the puzzle as well.
Absolutely. So you had asked about questions, right, to vet guides and guides and retreat centers and all of this. I think can fall into the same type of bucket, right? Which, like you said, where am I going? Who's going to be there? Is this a group situation? And if so, has the guide been working with these people consistently? Are they all new? How did you decide who was going to be there? For people like me who can be energy sensitive, that's a huge concern, because I can take on other people's energies or whatever they're going through, and sometimes that is great, right? Sometimes it's not what I want, but I talk about a lot, this idea of informed consent. And so the more you know, the more you can consent to. And so ask as many questions as you want to or can. And if people are not answering your questions or telling you you're asking too many questions, that's another red flag, right? People should be openly answering your questions. So we talked about has the guide sat with the medicine, how long have they been serving the medicine, where does the medicine come from, right? Is this and how is the medicine being prepared? Is this a lab situation? Is it from nature? What does that look like? We talked about testing. I also think price transparency is huge. You don't want to get into a situation where you think your preparation integration is included in the medicine experience and it's not, and then it's extra to do those things, right? That can be somebody's business model. That's fine, but it's important to know upfront kind of what you're getting into, what's available. Never should your guide tell you that you're special, and because you're special you need extra one-on-one work with them, right? That is a no-no as well. That's how, unfortunately, women specifically can get into harmful situations. Whether it's abuse of power, whether it's sexual in nature, you want to avoid those situations. You can also ask, has the guide, have you had sexual relationships with the people that you're serving? Again, you have to judge how honest these people are, and sometimes it's not even the answer, that it's the way, it's not the answer itself, it's the way they're answering the question, right? Or does their mood shift or their tone shift, or right, there's a lot that you can see if you're in person or if you're on a video call with somebody, right? So oftentimes those are the things that you're looking for. You want to know, like, if this is a medicine coming from an indigenous culture and community, like, what is the lineage? Have they been given permission from that lineage to serve this medicine? Because there's so many people who haven't. um, we could go on and on, right, about about safety. You can ask things, again, like if it's someone's house, right, that you're going to, has this space been cleared,
Yeah.
saged, or
And
whatever
reset.
the process
Yeah.
is. Yeah, yeah. What do we know? What was this space before? I've heard some stories about land, that ancient land that is built upon, right? That was burial ground, but that, again, no one ever asked the land permission to serve medicine on that land,
Oh,
and it's led to some people having really challenging experiences. So there's so much that goes into this, and again, it's like, you don't know what you don't know, which is why I really, really feel so strongly about being a community builder, because we learn from each other. This is how we learn what questions to ask, and how to ask them. And then, even once you have the answers, like how to know if this is a responsible decision for yourself. Sometimes we will have as much information as we feel comfortable with, and we'll still make a bad decision, but we won't know until we've been through that experience. But at least there are things that we can point to, of like, maybe this didn't feel great, but I did it anyway. That's something else, again, going back to like knowing your body, listening to your intuition. Like, how do you feel around these people that are going to be serving you medicine? For me, I have not, when I've worked guided, whether it's an indigenous healer or an underground guide, I have not worked with anybody that I haven't spent quite a bit of time with beforehand. Usually, when I go work with someone, it's not the first time I'm meeting that person, and it's not the first time I'm being around that person. And for me personally, that's what I need to feel safe.
Sometimes I think, there's a lot of conversation too about how you were talking about indigenous medicine and traditions and having blessing to use this versus how perhaps the West has kind of whitewashed a lot of these substances. It's a tricky topic because going to the Amazon and spending 10 days in Peru is often not the most accessible for many people. But I hate to also then say, well, then you don't deserve to sit with ayahuasca. That's not like I don't think that that's the right statement either. Um, so, do you feel that anyone that is serving these indigenous medicines really needs to have spent time in their country of origin, learning how to make them? I mean, what should somebody, what's the responsible way to do this with and being the most respectful with each of these substances? I mean, MDMA,
Mhm.
we understand, is coming from a lab. LSD, there are a lot of things that we can make just about anywhere, right? But ayahuasca or iboga or peyote or these other things that we're borrowing, how can we be the most respectful?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think the answer, um, I think I'm going to give you what my answer is, and other people will have other answers, and other things that make them comfortable. And definitely, like, again, I used to run a wellness hospitality company. I know how much it costs to go to Peru for 10 days, right? Especially, again, because for me, in the harm reduction lens of it all, if you're going to a retreat center for 10 days in Peru, you should probably build on a few days before and after, right? To ground and integrate. So then your 10 days becomes a minimum of 2 weeks. I get it. Um, that being said, if you find a community And this is also what I love about the Global Psychedelic Society, which I mentioned. They have a map on their website where you can find local communities all over the world and start to get to know people who sat with these medicines, right? Because there are Western teachers who themselves have gone and been initiated, right? I know quite a few who've spent years. And so while they themselves are not Indigenous, they went through the mentorship, the apprenticeship, all of the training, and were given permission to serve. And so it's not going to be as expensive as going to the jungle, right, for these certain medicines. I think that's one way to do it. Another way to do that, and again, I live in California, so I can only kind of speak to what I've seen in California, which is there are a lot of communities who bring Indigenous people to California to offer medicine journeys, right? So again, not as expensive as going there.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's another way to kind of do it. One of the guides that I sit with is initiated into the Iboga medicine. She doesn't feel ready to serve it yet, though,
Okay.
which I think is also amazing. And
Yeah.
knowing that makes me trust her even more as a guide,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
she has her own boundaries and she has her own experience and her own respect. So I think there's many different ways to do this. There's also ways that if you're going to sit with medicine in certain groups or with a certain guide, you can also ask them, like, how do they give back to where this tradition came from? So maybe that's another way to go ahead and do that. So there's so many different ways, and I think people have to find something that sits right with them. Also, knowing that we live in this context of this Western world, where things cost money, you have to take time off work. Uh, Most people have to take time out of their family's structure, right, as well. So there's a lot that goes into this. Um, so I think, again, having these open conversations, knowing what potential different options are out there and what path works for you at this time in your life that you decide to do it. It doesn't mean it's always going to be like that, or maybe you don't. We're using ayahuasca as an example. Maybe you don't even, this is the first time you're ever using the medicine. Like, you don't want to be in the jungle so far away from home, right? So there's all these things you have to consider, what feels safe for you. And then within what feels safe for you, you can start to ask these questions.
So your container and your cohort are entirely focused on women. Is that correct?
Yes.
What was the purpose behind keeping it women only?
Well, I think number one, I'm a woman identifying. So I know my demographic, if you will. Um, And I think because of a lot of the wellness work that I had done, the majority of the people that I have worked with throughout the past 15, 20 years have been women. It's just the nature of the health and wellness market. And within these friendships that I built, um, moving to Southern California and developing my own community, it was women that I started to hear these stories from of harm. And I'm not saying it doesn't happen to men, because it absolutely does. I'm not saying it doesn't happen to non binary people. It absolutely does. I'm not saying it doesn't happen to trans people. It absolutely does, right? Like, harm does not pick race, gender,
It's everywhere.
where you are in the world. It just, unfortunately, it's a reality. And the stories that I was hearing were from women identifying people, and they seem to sit in two camps. One is of a sexual nature, and whether that was from the guides themselves, whether that was from the group participants in mixed groups that they would go sit in medicine with.
Oh, okay.
Um, or whether the other part of that was, again, not having the education or the resources or the knowledge to ask the questions that would alleviate some of that harm. And so for me, it was just sort of a natural, like, okay, I know how to help this subset of people. And I found, as in talking to women, when there were women identifying people in the space, people were more able to open up and be vulnerable without fear of slipping back into either gender norms in terms of how they see themselves in the world or what their place was or their caste or class or, all of that stuff. It seemed to be more of a level playing field.
Yeah, that vulnerability is a huge part of the integration too, right? And I think that's also a huge part of why any kind of harm or abuse, whether it's sexual or, an abuse of power, um, because people are entering psychedelic spaces vulnerable. That's why you're going into this situation anyway. You're trying to work on something that wasn't working anywhere else, maybe, or, so you're walking in so vulnerable, and then being able to continue the path of vulnerability on the other side all the way through the integration is, yeah, I love the concept of the work that you do. And I think it's just so important to have a place, whether it's for somebody to just step in after, they had a ceremony over the weekend or a day trip solo or whatever. That concept of community is going to just bring up, little tidbits all along the way. Like I feel like even it's been maybe 5 or 6 years since the last time I sat with ayahuasca. And every now and again, there's still this like little something will come up and I'll be like, oh, that's what that was about. Whoa, cool. I want to, I got to share about this. I didn't know then that that was what's happening now. I wonder if anybody else wants to hear this, I think it's super.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the thing with integration, as you mentioned, right? It's a lifelong practice, right? And it can be decades when something clicks and it takes you back. Um, and so I think that's also part of the reason for the online global community that I created is I wanted people at a very low cost to be able to enter this community and just have that space. So even if you're not actively taking medicine itself, you're still in this practice, you're still in this process, right? You're integrating either your previous experience or maybe without even knowing it, you're prepping for your next experience, right? And so it's this safe place to have these conversations, to ask questions that maybe you don't know where to ask them, to build trusted relationships with guides. Again, I don't work with anyone that I've met just randomly for the first time. To build that trusted relationship in a safe space is important. The other thing I mentioned is in this process of preparation, taking the medicine, and then integration, it because it's such a long process for many people, the person that you sit with, the facilitator, the person who's guiding you and giving you the medicine, they can't necessarily be there 2 years from now to talk to you when something comes
Yeah.
up, right? And so again, the importance of community, to have this community where you can say, hey, this came up, I'm not sure how to deal with it. Or like I said, we run these cohorts, we have preparation circles, we have coffee in community chats where you can get to know people. It's just this sense of I'm not alone and I know where I can turn. Should something come up, should I have a question to ask? Should I be traveling, let's say, to Canada or to Greece, and I want to hang out with someone that would understand what I've been through, right? You can start to make friends with this thread from being in community together.
I like that. So everyone, there are people that are just connecting outside of group as well. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
How often do you meet as a whole?
So the Reveal, the online community, is open 24/7, right? People are constantly posting. And what we do right now, so the community is pretty new. We've only been live in the public space for about 3 months at this point. And so we will continue to build on this, but We host some free webinars, which you don't have to be in the community to join. We really, again, this idea of enabling safe transformation, we want to build this foundation where people have access to education, regardless of whether you're in our community or not. And so we do free webinars about once a month. Last month, we did the history of psychedelics. And next month, we're going to look at microdosing and talk about microdosing. And these are free webinars that anyone can join. To see the replays, you have to be in the Reveal community, right? So there is some reasons there to join the community. We once a month host our Coffee and Community, which is a virtual event. And that virtual event, each month in Reveal, there's a theme. So we've had themes like your most profound journey or your most challenging journey. We've had themes like psychedelics and family. Like, can you talk to your family about this stuff, right? So meeting as a community to talk through some of those themes. We also monthly have a preparation circle. And as I mentioned, like the preparation circles can be integration as well as preparation, right? Because it's all linked. But that is a great time for you to come and ask all, it's kind of like an ask me anything. You're not sure about something, let's talk about it, right? Let's draw on that collective wisdom of the community that shows up into those preparation circles so we can all help and support each other. And then right now we're doing it quarterly, but we have this embodied integration cohort, and that is a level up in terms of you. That's something you have to pay for, and that is 6 women only, and it's focused into a 4-week cohort. That's co-led by myself and a therapist who also is a guide. And so together we meet every week, and there's homework. But this is where we teach you some of those practical tools, whether it's visualization or energy work, tapping, understanding some of CybAM, right? All these kind of tools that are in the psychedelic space. And so it's a great place because not only do you come and you learn a technique for the beginning portion of our meeting, but then we have time to tell our stories, talk to other people, support each other, and then we're connected throughout that month in a private space within the community so we can share what's been coming up for us as we continue to use these techniques in our daily lives. Because a lot of the wellness techniques that I've mentioned, they're great, sure, when you're on medicine, but they're also to be used in your daily life.
I mean, being human is an integration process, right? Well, I love how you've put this together. It's incredibly thoughtful, and just the energy around it feels really supportive. I'll definitely drop any of that in the show notes that you'd like to share as well.
Absolutely. And we're always looking, right, to open the community to like-minded people. And specifically, BIPOC, minority, and other guides who are willing to be a little forthcoming. It's a private vetted community. So, it's not on a public forum. You have to answer a few questions to get in. We have to verify your identity, which is how we keep it safe. But this is a place that I'm hoping that we can bridge that gap between those looking for these experiences and those providing the experiences, because it's kind of like once you kind of get into your little ecosystem wherever you are, you seem to be able to find resources. But if you don't know where to go, or if you're a guide and you're looking for more people to work with, right, this is the best way to build these relationships with people, is to interact in the same space, to share your knowledge with each other, and to support each other through this process.
Love that. All right, everyone, if you feel called to walk through the door, the Reveal door is potentially open to you. So, well, thank you so much, Linden. This was super helpful and really interesting. I'm stoked for the work that you're doing in the community, and thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Holly.